Welcome to the September meeting. It's only the fourth time. Overview and Scrutiny Committee of North Norfolk District Council. As far as I know, there are no fire alarms planned this morning. So if the alarm goes off, it's for real, and please exit the chamber by the two exits there and there and go down the stairs to exit the building, and toilets are available in the foyer outside. And we'll have a coffee break after approximately 1.5 hours if we need it. So do we have any apologies?
We have apologies. Apologies from Councillor Penfold.
Lovely. Do we have any substitutes?
No substitutes,
No.
Chair.
Do we have any public questions and statements?
No public
No.
questions.
So now we'll move on to the minutes. And I had a query about the minutes on page 5. Just how we were going to handle recommendation N, which is the additional recommendation that we made following our discussion. And I was proposing that we change the wording very slightly in order to align with the minutes for full council, which are slightly different, and also to take out the addition to page 41.5.6a, that because it refers obviously to a paper in the previous meeting and won't make any sense on its own. So I was proposing that we didn't change the meaning of the recommendation, but we changed the wording to that the underspend in the purchase of bin capital budget to be put towards the cost of delivering food waste and moved to an additional capital budget. Is everyone happy with that? Emma had recommended the change, as I say, to align with the minutes of the full council meeting. So can we change the wording to that? That would be great. Has anyone else got any comments on the minutes? No? Everyone content with the accuracy of them? Okay. Would anyone like to propose them? Nothing? And second them? And is everyone in agreement? Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. So do we have any items of urgent business?
No items of
Okay.
urgent business, Chair.
And does anyone have any declarations of interest? Any of the committee members in any of the items today? No, thank you very much indeed. So petitions from members of the public, and we are here today to consider a petition against the closure of the footpath known as God's Path in Pretty Corner Woods, Sheringham. On the 13th of August, a paper petition with 738 signatures from residents stating addresses or postcodes from within the North Norfolk district was submitted to North Norfolk District Council. A further 27 signatures were provided, but may not fall within the criteria to be accepted within the petition scheme due to insufficient information to support the signatory living, working or studying within the North Norfolk District Council area, in which case the petition has been accepted as a valid petition. And the following aims of the petition were stated: to restore public access to the footpath known as God's Path in Pretty Corner Woods, Sheringham. So we have some petitioners here, and I understand you would like to speak. Is that correct? Would you like to come to the front?
Thank you for hearing us and considering our petition. We are Preserve Our Woods, a Sheringham-based campaign group of 9 dedicated volunteers, united by one mission to reopen God's Path. This small stretch of woodland holds deep meaning for many. It's not just a path, it is a slice of heaven, a place of peace, well-being and connection to nature. Its closure has left a void. The reasons for the closure have shifted from health and safety to beetle damage to a wildlife and fauna habitat concern, yet clarity remains elusive. As community support and media interest grew, Countryside's response became more aggressive. More trees were felled, brush was piled higher, and bigger barriers were built and wildlife cameras were installed. Why? Despite our repeated efforts to engage, the Countryside team has refused any further interaction. Their actions have created hazards, not reduced them. Woodland walkers understand natural risks, fallen branches, uneven ground, but fencing off nature only demands more control, not less. Why weren't the trees topped in the area of God's Path, an approach recommended by an independent local arboricultural expert, Chris Shortis? Why was this area treated so differently from the rest of Pretty Corner? No other clearance within Pretty Corner Woods has caused such public outcry or distress. 70% of footpaths within Pretty Corner Woods have been blocked by Countryside over the years. God's Path offered accessible exercise and mental health benefits, especially for our older residents and their four-legged companions. Studies show nature speeds recovery, boosts immunity, and supports mental well-being. This is recognised by Green Flag as well. The longer alternative routes simply do not offer the same accessibility or connection for our older residents. To many, the destruction of God's Path feels unjust, an excessive response that stripped away a beloved walk. We respectfully ask the committee for reinstatement of God's Path, assurance that the Countryside team has a genuine 5-year management plan, and that all actions, including tree felling and camera installation, are backed by proper risk assessment, method statements, and the costs are proportionate to the risk. We also ask for commitment that no similar measures will be taken elsewhere in Pretty Corner Woods without consultation and community input. With your help, we hope God's Path can be reopened for nature, for well-being, and for the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Not sure how to turn it off. Thank you.
Members, do you have any questions? We have the Countryside team here to answer.
What would be the overall cost to have this done?
To reopen the path? I wouldn't be able to put a figure on that at the moment.
I think it's worth at this point saying that it's not a trail, a waymarked trail. It's not a path that we would recognise in Pretty Corner. I think there is a plan that we've supplied to the committee in terms of where we're talking about. It's what we would consider to be a desire line that cuts the corner off one of our waymarked trails. And therefore, if we were to open the path that's locally known as God's Path, it's never a phrase or a term that we've used as an organisation or identified it as on a map. If we were to reopen that path, or if we were to open it, that desire line, it would mean a whole change in the management of that block of woodland. It is a solid block of trees, and there is a path around the edge of it. But to open that desire line would mean the extra surveying of trees along it for health and safety reasons, but also would have detrimental impacts on the habitat in that area, which is designed to be a block of woodland trees.
Thank you, Chair. Just been looking at the OS and aerial photographs of that area, and the OS clearly shows the official paths. I can make out from an air photograph where this God's Path probably is, but it's clearly not recognised by the Ordnance Survey. Then clearly it is well used. But we might want to have some further information as to why it can't be reopened, and a little bit more detail than perhaps members have had so far. Thank you.
So our standard approach to managing our sites is to have the managed and the waymarked trails, which we look after and we know they're safe and accessible for people to use. Woodland blocks are reserved for nature and regeneration. and such like. This site is a county wildlife site, so it's identified as a site that is rich in wildlife and seeks to support locally threatened wildlife species and habitats. So we're kind of obligated to keep that going. We want to develop the wildlife habitats that are there. And as part of the recent County Council Nature Recovery Strategy, Pretty Corners was identified as an area of particular importance for biodiversity. Alongside all that, we have a felling licence for the site, which is issued by Forestry England. Most of the blocks, including this one, or a lot of the blocks, Anna will be able to fill in on this, are we have a felling licence where this block in particular, we were going to thin and allow for natural regeneration of trees. So it's not thinning and planting, it's natural regeneration. And that natural regeneration can't occur if people are walking through or dogs are walking through. That just doesn't happen. So it's just our standard approach. This is supported by a lot of partners. You know, recently we've got the green flag for I think it's the 10th year consecutively this year, and we received the highest score possible for that. We've got local ecologists which support us. The Wildlife Trust have written us a real strong email to say they support this, and that, you know, they state here that these paths going through blocks that cause detrimental damage through soil compaction, damage to tree root systems. So we really do strongly believe that what we're doing is the right thing. There are approximately 8 kilometres, possibly a bit more, of waymarked trails for people to walk and enjoy nature and receive the health and well-being benefits and the mental health benefits of walking in this site. So there are lots of reasons why we are keen to continue to manage in the way that we do all of our sites, not just Pretty Corner, but Whole Country Park and others as well.
Yeah, a question about the path. There's obviously the waymarked path. How much further? Because it's on the map, it doesn't look a lot different. How much further would a person have to walk if they took the waymarked path rather than the other?
Not much. I mean, I couldn't give you a meterage, but it's not far. It's just around the corner. Admittedly, as you go around the corner, it goes down the hill and it might be a little bit more difficult, but this is a woodland site. You know, it's not the most accessible woodland site in the world because it is undulating. But to answer your question, not a lot further.
No, thank you. That's a clearer picture. And I think for me, that shows that it is going right through the middle of the woodland. And are the trees, I understand the trees are very mature now, so that's why some of them are being felled. And could you explain a bit more
yeah,
about
they
that?
are reaching maturity, and it's plantation of conifer trees, so they are reaching the thinning. That would be the main thing we need to do now within that block.
One additional question. So safety would be paramount as well.
Within
this.
Within the woodland block, there are trees in there that are deteriorating, and we would, to make an area safe for people, we would have to fell more trees and open up the woodland block, and then surveying would increase because you would then have to survey on the green trail going round, and then next to where the red line is, either side of that. So you're reducing your woodland block for habitat basically, and that's not really what we're trying to achieve, and what we're trying to achieve with the felling licence as well, and with a county wildlife site.
Thank you. That's really helpful. That explains it. Yeah, get my head around that bit. Thank you.
Yeah, you've just said that you're going to be felling trees anyway. So how many trees are going to need to be felled if this footpath stays?
The point is that when we fell trees within woodland blocks, it's for habitat management.
No, I understand that.
It's a thinning of trees. So if you were to, and then when you thin the trees out, it's a certain species of tree. You're trying to let them.
Yeah, I understand that as well. But you haven't answered the question. How many trees have got to be felled? And in your project,
yeah,
you've just said you're thinning. So how many trees are you felling?
It's volume. It's not. So you get given a felling licence for volume within blocks. So
okay. So if the footpath stays, what's the volume you'd have to fell then?
We can't guess that. We just have to look, all the felling licenses are coming through. You wouldn't be able to guess that. You'd thin it out, and you get requirement of how much you're allowed to fell out. So you're not allowed to go over that.
So that seems a bit of a non-answer to me, because
so
you're saying on the one hand that if the footpath stays, you've got to fell trees for health and safety.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you're also saying you're going to fell because you're thinning out. That's a
but
contradiction, surely.
No, because path is going through a woodland block, and the woodland block is for habitat. It's not for, you know, if that's what we're meant to do. So you naturally thin to regeneration of tree species within a block. So the trees along the path, the waymark paths, are health and safety trees. So if there's any dangerous or just diseased trees next to those paths, they will be felled. But that's the health and safety trees is different from thinning trees. There's lots of different management techniques within a.
So basically, health and safety comes before habitat conservation and biodiversity.
It's
doesn't it?
balance managed. It has to be balanced. But
Yeah,
health
balance.
and safety is paramount.
Sorry?
Sorry, Emily would just like to come
Can
in.
I just interject there? So I think Annie actually got to that point in the end that the felling license allows us to clear trees which reach maturity and allows us to pick and choose based on a volume and percentage in that woodland block. Whereas if we were to reopen that desire line, then we would have to fell trees based on their health and safety risk rather than being able to pick and choose which ones. So we might end up felling trees that provide dead wood for insects and wildlife within that wooden block. And we do manage all of our sites based on 3 principles, one being health and safety, and that absolutely has to be paramount. We're all conscious of what happened quite locally at Feldrig, where so we're conscious of that. So we're managing them with health and safety in mind. And we obviously have that risk as a council to ensure that we're controlling it by regular tree surveys. We manage them with habitat in mind, and we manage them with public access in mind. They're the 3 principles that we apply to managing woodland sites. So.
Okay, so you're basically saying that really this has got to be removed, this path, or this path cannot be reopened on A, health and safety grounds, and B, your programme for tree felling. Is that correct?
And wildlife, yes. Wildlife habitat.
Wildlife is a given. It has to be. Okay, fine. Thank you.
Councillor Hankins?
Thank you, Chair. I understand this path has been in use for a considerable period of time. Is that correct?
No, we don't believe so. So COVID? Yeah, around COVID, it wasn't being used heavily, and it wasn't until the Ranger team noticed recently, or start of this year, I think, that it was becoming a clear desire line, as we're calling it, that we realised that it was being used more often.
Okay, second part of the question is, what initiated this change? What and who initiated this change?
As in the
Closing the path.
closing of the path. So
Yeah.
the Rangers, through their management of the site, noticing that the path was being used, realising that it was going through the block. So then what process we often use is we will install some dead hedging around the edge, low level dead hedging, to encourage people not to use a certain area. And that's what we started doing. Unfortunately, it continued to get used. So we just increased the dead hedging so that it was a more obvious barrier to the woodland block.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Bold, did you want to come back in again? Sorry. against you.
No, no, no,
Hankins first.
no, it's fine. I think just a very quick one. Were the path to be reopened, we would still have to do the thinning because that's a natural thing we'd have to do. So that area would then lose more trees than it would do. You couldn't go, oh, we'll open the path, so there we'll cut more trees down there, and then you still have to do the thinning, wouldn't you? So you'd
Yeah,
end up
so,
with a net loss.
When you carry out a survey, you're thinking about the falling distance of how trees will impact. So you're basically doing a survey of all the trees that are on the green trail and on the red trail as well. So it's falling distance of those dead trees, dying trees, falling on people that are walking on that path. And it wasn't just that path, it's through the whole of that woodland block that people were walking through. So when you come to an area and you realise people are walking through an area, they're risking, you know, there are dead trees and there you've got high winds which are more repetitive than they have been. We've got dead standing wood in there for wildlife. We know there are known wildlife species in there. Bats are protected by law that use these dead woods. Wild birds are protected by law. So when people walk through woodland blocks, you're increasing the risk to them. And then we have to, if it was opened up as a main path, we would have to increase our surveying because of all the falling trees going towards the path.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, to me, it doesn't really seem worth it to reopen the path, given the, the destruction to ecological wildlife and the health and safety issues as well. Just for like a very, not even really much of a shortcut, to be honest. So, yeah.
Can I just probe the accessibility question that came up? Was that a function of the gradient of the walk you would have to take? Were you not being allowed to use God's path, or was anything else involved with that?
Believe that the desire line path, known as God's path, is still on a significant gradient. So we don't think that it does make the site more accessible for people with mobility issues. It's uneven and equally up the same gradient.
Thank you. Members have any more questions? No? Does the Countryside, Lucy, sorry, Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank the Countryside team because the work that you do is often really hidden. We've got a woodland in North Walsham, for example, where we had a similar issue, if you remember, of people using bikes through the woods, and we had to implement a similar measure because of the destruction to the woodland. So it's the fine balance between us enjoying the woodland peacefully without just being there and having the paths put through for us, versus how do we ensure that nature prevails there, because that is the beauty of the woodland. And we had a very similar issue in North Walsham, and it did take quite some time for residents to realise we were protecting the woodland rather than trying to create different routes through. And I think with the pathways we've got, I have walked around, and it's very much we are invited into the woodland to enjoy it through the pathways, but not to trample through it because it belongs to nature inevitably. So my question would be, the pathways that are there, how long have they been in place for? That's probably quite a long history of, because the risk that I see is if we're going to create new pathways through existing woodland, where is the limit on where we will stop with that? Because the route goes round the trees that we're trying to enable the natural habitat to. And if we keep putting roots through the trees, how much of the habitat are we going to leave naturally? And obviously, would it affect our green flag status if we're going to start installing extra pathways through our woodlands?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Shires. As those trails have been marked for a long time, they're historic trails, and form part of that green flag application that we put in each year. We do consider whether we should introduce new trails, and that's part of when we're making the application about considering whether that site is accessible. So that is part of that consideration. But I think you probably hit the nail on the head. It's a concern of the team that if it seems like a 90-metre path, what's the harm? It could be said. But I think it's where does it stop? Someone else considers a path through a different block as their version of God's path, or they like walking their dog through this block, and we open one, and where do we start? It changes the nature of that woodland into a woodland that has waymarked trails, into a woodland that is a site where you can roam freely throughout, and that's a different type of woodland management and not one that we at the moment subscribe to.
So with that alternate form of woodland management, would that be a different version of felling? Would it be the two versions of fellings that you discussed, the habitat felling and the health and safety felling?
You've got felling for health and safety risks, and then felling for thinning. But you can, within the Forestry Commission, you can do different things like regeneration, felling, and thinning. There'll be different form of felling. But I must say, all our tree work is governed by the Forestry England. An officer came out and checked what we were going to do, and he's agreed with the felling. So what we're going to do in the future. So that's all analysed and checked at all times.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your answers. That's put a few things in perspective for me. I don't know about the rest of the committee. We're not specifically asked to make a recommendation. I understand it's an ongoing process, this. And that will you be having further discussions?
We've attended 2 public meetings, one of Sheringham Town Council's Environment Committee in March to discuss the matter with the group Preserve Our Woods. We've also met with them individually. I believe that was might have been March or April, early April, to discuss it. We currently have a corporate complaint in the system as well from the action group. So we will, now this committee's been held, respond to that corporate complaint.
It's from an individual.
Okay. Oh, thank you for the
Individual.
clarity on that.
Yeah.
My apologies. I
The
didn't
two
quite
matters
realise.
have to be kept separate. So.
Okay, thank you.
So my understanding was that these were 2 completely different issues, which they obviously are for the different people. Well, obviously not. Obviously, the footpath is the same, but I mean, we would be interested to hear an update on this. I think there's, I think that a certain amount of interest in it, and perhaps a divergence of opinion. So, would it be appropriate if you could come back and let us know, say, at the next meeting, how things are going? Would that be too soon?
No, I think we could update you at the next meeting, I'm sure. But I'm not quite sure what we'll be updating you on, because our opinion remains that we shouldn't reopen the desire line. So what would you like us to update you on at the next meeting, Chair?
Has anybody got any ideas? I mean, we're not coming to a conclusion here about whether we think or should or shouldn't. We've had one opinion voiced. Are you saying that, are there any other occasions when you'll be interacting with the public, will you maybe hearing their views? Or is the decision, your opinion, fixed?
I think given that we've been considering this matter since March, and we've had those public meetings and those options to discuss it, that our opinion won't change. We've consulted with stakeholders, as you've heard this morning, that back those and share those views on our woodland management and the management of that site. So our view won't be changing on whether we reopen that path or not.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bailey.
Chair, can I suggest that once we've had the review of the complaint, corporate complaint from the individual, maybe that'd be a good time to copy us in as a committee on the response to that complaint, and then we could review the matter once that's dealt with as well.
Okay. Is everyone happy with that idea? Okay, lovely. So we'll take it on the timescale that the complaint will proceed, and we'll hear afterwards. Yes.
Thank you,
Okay.
Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your presentation. And I think we had the Police and Crime Commissioner here for our next item. Our next item is consideration of any matter referred to the committee by a member, but I'm not aware that we have any.
No, Chair.
No, thanks very much indeed. So I think Miss Taylor, are you here? Hello, would you like to come to the front? So it's my great pleasure to welcome Sarah Taylor. Thank you for coming. You got all hooked up into the system.
Sorry.
Are you all hooked up into the system now?
About it, which is good. So
It's a good sign.
progress. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much for coming. Choose some questions. I didn't know if I had to look at them.
Well,
Sorry?
People won't be able to hear if you don't use microphones.
sorry, I didn't realise this was part of the meeting. I thought you were just checking that everything was good. Okay.
I did. That was the preamble, I'm afraid.
Okay. Thank you. No, I just really need some caffeine, which is here. I know, I need the heat. Thank you very much. Right, okay, good morning. So I am Sarah Taylor, I'm Police and Crime Commissioner for Norfolk. It is highly unusual for me to receive questions. So this is not, I've done 3 overview and scrutiny commissions now. This is my 4th. This is the first time I've been given questions. So do you just want me to run through the questions and respond to them? Or, because I could have done that in writing, how do you want me to proceed?
Well, I thought you could answer the questions and then we could have a general discussion. Would that be too much? Is that overload? Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, so I've brought in copies of the Police and Crime Plan, which set out the priorities for Norfolk. That was released earlier in the year. So running through the questions in order. What's the main priorities for policing? Has everyone got the questions in front of them, or do I need to read them out? Okay, so in response to question 1, the principal priorities for the county are set out in the Police and Crime Plan, which has been published for a while. The current district priorities are set at the district priority meeting. The last one was set in June this year, and that was to target ASB across the market towns of North Norfolk for the summer period. The next priority setting meeting is scheduled to take place on Wednesday, 17th of September. You'll appreciate that a lot of these are asking around operational policing, which is not in my demise. Therefore, I'm just sort of expressing the police's response. With respect to question 2, funding and redundancies. I'm not aware of any concerns in the press recently regarding funding and redundancies. Ultimately, the police across the country largely have been experiencing 14 years of year-on-year cuts and year-on-year real-term reductions in funding. So to a certain extent, this is business as usual. The police have responded extremely well nationally to a reduction in resourcing. My observations are that the police as an entity, I'm not being specific around Norfolk Police, as an entity, they tend to respond to funding cuts in terms of responses along the lines of public safety will not be sort of compromised and that kind of messaging, which on the one hand is very reassuring. And it should be reassuring because we can see that it's not compromised in terms of those high risk, high harm crimes that they're keeping us safe from. But on the other hand, that kind of response does sort of, it makes very quiet the real world sort of impacts of the funding cuts, which is to say that while the high harm, high risk crimes and instances are continue to be dealt with, the low harm, low risk instances, the stuff that I would refer to as the sort of stuff of life that we see and we bump into on a daily basis, the police simply do not have the resource and the capacity to deal with those. So the things that exercise a lot of the local residents in most councillors' areas, so things like speeding, parking on footways, the low harm, low risk stuff, but we see every single day. clearly, if the resource and the capacity isn't necessarily there to deliver the same level of policing coverage that might have been expected or hoped for perhaps 20 years ago. So that's the reality of where we are. So in terms of required duties, it depends on the definition of required duties is I think my sort of conclusion on that one. If we're looking at high harm, high risk, then we can see that they're still prioritised. The low harm, low risk, clearly are going to be deprioritised, as you would reasonably expect, I think. All of that said, Norfolk and Suffolk constabularies have a really significant shared space, which you're probably aware of. That accounts for the overwhelming majority of funding allocation. And as a key part of that, that was set up a number of years ago, well over 10 years ago. And that was set up in order to achieve cash sort of savings and efficiencies. Because we're one of the very few, I think there were 2 others, constabulary partnerships in that sort of way, Norfolk has benefited from a lot of efficiencies that other areas haven't. And so a lot of the efficiencies that other areas might be looking for now, we have already achieved. And the constabulary and my predecessors have achieved that some time ago. Therefore, going forward, there's just a very practical aspect that further efficiencies that the government might expect to be delivered here are not necessarily possible because we've already done them. And that was articulated to the now previous policing minister. Obviously, she has a successor in post, so we'll be looking forward to picking that with them in due course. The next question regarding devolution and local government reorganisation. I think it has the well, there's 2 sort of aspects. I don't think it has the potential to significantly. This is a curious question. The role of policing. The police's role is mandated legislatively. The role of the police will not change just by virtue of devolution and local government. The police will be there as they are now. They will operate sort of independently, as you'd expect. Their role will not change. What policing looks like and the effectiveness of partnership working, which of course so much of the prevention and victim support and care and the community safety aspects depends on, has the potential to be, I would euphemistically say, significantly disrupted by one or both of devolution and local government reorganisation. I think that sort of potential is in plain sight, and we need to be very mindful of the scope for considerable disruption to result from both of those things. If I take devolution just as one example, you're likely aware now that so the PCC function will be incorporated into the mayoral function on the 1st of April 27. But with the mayor being elected in May next year, so there'll be an 11-month transition period. My office have to facilitate that transition, which a sort of relatively quick cost estimate, because everything is quick, cost estimate of the resourcing required for that is a pretty significant 6-figure sum, because there is so much administratively which will need to be transitioned into the mayoral office, the function of the PCC and the office of the PCC. There is no additional resourcing or funding from the Home Office or the Ministry in order to achieve that. So my office of 20 people is expected to effectively absorb about £200,000 worth of work on top of the business as usual function, which, given that there are so few people and a fantastic amount of work associated with the transition arrangements, is just a mathematical impossibility. So I've spoken with a lot of local councillors, as you might imagine, and people have been asking me around what my intentions are for the long-term arrangements in Norfolk, and put very plainly, I can't have any, and that's because my term has been foreshortened. and the organisations that you would normally, under normal conditions, work with in order to deliver those long-term or even medium-term arrangements will not exist in 2027. So that's obviously the district councils, the county council, the ICB, my own office, all of them are falling away. Therefore, the potential for medium or long-term provisions has fallen away now. So it's not so much the police as everything that the police operate within, the context that the police operate within. And it is not my normal mode, it's not my normal character to be particularly pessimistic, but I think I am a realist. Having worked in engineering for decades, I think it behooves me to be that. And I think I would really encourage yourselves, your colleagues who are also local members, to really engage with that quite potentially knotty problem, to look at how we can perhaps work at a grassroots level to increase community resilience over this period, work with BCSEs, work with community groups, so that while we may not be able to provide that medium to long-term provision, we can at least still do things at a community level. So I'd really welcome sort of engagement with that as that goes forward, albeit that I don't know what that looks like currently, because you'll appreciate there's still an enormous amount of uncertainty. So in terms of question 4, the short answer to that is yes. There is a strong supply line. I seem to go to pass out parades every few weeks. I've got another one in 2 weeks. It is by a considerable margin one of the best parts of this job is going to the pass out parades. It is really, it's just brilliant to see so many people coming through from enormous range of backgrounds. You've got mature students, you've got fresh-faced sort of young people coming out of college. It's a really diverse range of people now entering the police service, which is fantastic. So yeah, we've generally got a healthy position there, which is great, and I hope that I can continue to report that. Right, so question 5, in terms of the challenges in policing. The principal challenge in North Norfolk is the same as it is in other parts of Norfolk, which is plainly its rurality. So things like travel times for police, not so much, well, the response, but in general, all of the policing undertaking, the travel times can be a difficult sort of practicality to overcome. So you'll be aware that we've got officers based at a number of stations across the North Norfolk district, including next door, clearly. We've also got challenges in terms of it being a coastal area, and you'll be aware, and it's very sensitive to the fact that, of course, the population and the needs change seasonally over time, and then geographically as well. You've got different sort of demands within the district. And while we have that in other areas, obviously, the coast is extremely long in Norfolk. We've got other highly desirable areas to go, such as the Broads. So the constabulary is very well used to overcoming those challenges. I wanted just to give perhaps I think when people think about the main challenges, excuse me, it tends to be thought of in terms of things like response times, you know, the blue lights response times. I think most people have an understanding of that. The response times in Norfolk are good. HMICFRS has found that they are good, and there's continued work going on that basis to improve those further. I did want to give an example, though, of how challenging policing in a rural county like ours can be, in terms of parts of the population that perhaps don't get so much airtime. So a really good example from my perspective, albeit one that a lot of people don't perhaps are not fully cited on, is firearms licensing. So there are thousands of people with firearms licenses in Norfolk, as there are in most other counties. And you may be aware there's a significant backlog nationally in the way that firearms licenses are administered. And that's due in part to the way that the licensing process was, let's just say, refreshed or revised a couple of years ago. But one of the issues from a policing perspective has been for a while that the charge, the cost that could be imposed on the licensee has not covered the full cost of the firearms license administration. Excuse me. So the government, I think if I recall correctly, late last year, put in place what they termed a full cost recovery model for the firearms licensing process. So they increased the amount that the police could charge the licensee. In some areas, that is a true full cost recovery. In Norfolk, it is not. And so for every firearms license that comes through, Norfolk Constabulary run at a deficit. And that is because of the travel time. So because in order to deal with the license, they have to go and visit the licensee, and the travel times and the travel costs associated with doing that across the thousands of licensees is very substantial. So that's just one relatively small aspect of policing. But then if you, it's compounded by all of those kind of similar issues across many, many aspects of policing. Question 6. So, problem with speeding, inappropriate driving. Correct. Yes. I'm laughing out of sort of exasperation, really. You are possibly aware that the reason why I stood as candidate for this role was because in my professional life, I could physically on the ground see a difference between the way that road safety was dealt with in Norfolk compared with other counties. And I was professionally curious as to why that might be. Had some suspicions, but I wasn't sure looking from the outside in. And I think when I spoke with a lot of people are very forthcoming about their views on road safety. And I can see that there is a great, the overwhelming majority as a proportion of my correspondence and the interactions that I have with the public relate in some way, directly or indirectly, to road safety. That said, I think I've said before, and my observation, this hasn't changed, is that there seems to be a bit of a gap between the public's demand and what I think are reasonable expectations, and then some of the ways that it has been prioritised. And I think this is largely a political prioritisation. And so I'm just talking broadly and then I'll sort of narrow into the area. When I speak with the forensic team, with the serious collision investigation team, with the ACC within the police who has command of those teams, I see a large number of extremely engaged people. They're professionally curious. They're really interested in how to take a preventative approach to road safety. They are really engaged obviously they're people, so you get variance, but as a whole, I'm seeing a really engaged approach to the problem of speeding, driving, road safety sort of in the round. And yeah, as I say, a real engagement with best practice that's emerging and looking for ways of policing our roads more successfully. I was at a Policing Excellence Awards for Norfolk Constabulary last week, and one of the winners developed something called Operation Foxtail, which has been an unbelievably successful way of policing roads. They have seized weapons and drugs and all kinds of just unbelievable sort of success in terms of taking uninsured vehicles off our roads, just hugely successful. And that was driven by one person. So when I talk about professional curiosity and a real engagement with it, I'm seeing it across different aspects of policing. I'm not necessarily seeing the same level of engagement with other authorities. And so you'll appreciate that some of you were there. I attended a public meeting, it wasn't a public meeting, it was with parish councils that was convened by Steph Ackroyd MP at the end of last year, at the beginning of this year, regarding the Bodham Road corridor. And I think those of us who attended there could see a little bit of a difference. People talked about the huge number of speed limits on that corridor, and there's a real inconsistency of approach within speed limit setting. All of those things, we have to appreciate this is part of a singular system that ensures that people are safe. And if you've got inconsistency in speed limit setting, well, then it's not going to be a surprise that some people will speed as a result. So on the one hand, the police should and do enforce speeding. But on the other hand, the speed limits also must be set appropriately. And this is a really good example of an area that I see a distinct difference in Norfolk to other counties. And I've said it before and I will keep on saying it. I would really, really love to see more political engagement by Norfolk County Council and a more preventative and best practice approach to speed limit setting, just as one example. So again, sort of moving from that singular system aspect into the local aspect, there is a challenge in terms of the geographic size of Norfolk. It is huge, about 10,000 kilometres of road to cover. The scale of the task is phenomenal. But that said, the people that I want to absolutely tip my hat to first are actually the community speed watch teams. I know there are a number in North Norfolk. There are really active teams across Norfolk, actually, of volunteers who have what I think is a pretty thankless task. They're volunteers who are really motivated to keep their village or their hamlet, their streets safe. They're doing what they can to do it. And I mean, I've seen it when I've been with some of them. They can be at the sharp end of some people's tongues when they don't appreciate the work that those Speedwatch volunteers are doing. I do appreciate the work that they're doing, and I know other local communities do also. So I want to give them a specific kind of acknowledgement for their work. And if you are a local member with the community Speedwatch team in your area, I'd really advocate for you to visit them if you don't already know them, because, as I say, it can feel pretty thankless for those volunteers. Those volunteers across Norfolk issue thousands of letters every year to drivers who are found to be speeding in their area. We know that they do make an effect. Obviously, there are limitations on the effectiveness of the community speed watch letters, because they're not, they're not the police, but they do make a significant impact, which I think we need to acknowledge. So within the policing, there's a lot of work that happens. You probably all have parishes within your demise which have SAM2 cameras and other kind of instruments that are deployed. I would love to see different speed monitoring equipment being used, because I know there are several parishes in North Norfolk which understandably have written to me to ask for my thoughts, bit of free consultancy maybe with my old professional hat on. And I would also be frustrated if I were a parish councillor to find out that the kind of apparatus that I was putting onto my parish doesn't give me the information I thought that it might. So I would, again, love to see a more highly usable data set being generated from that kind of equipment. But again, and I'm trying to express this as an objective fact. It's not a political statement, because it's an asset on Norfolk County Council roads. Those assets have to be approved by Norfolk County Council. So it might be that colleagues in the room who perhaps twin hatters or who have relationships with councillors at Norfolk County Council could perhaps advocate for your local residents in that way as well. Because it's a point of detail that a lot of people just are not cited on, but it has the potential to make quite a lot of difference. And the reason why it has the potential to make quite a lot of difference is that it could make data available to the police for them to then be more surgical in how they then go about their enforcement. I know of one parish council in North Norfolk who wrote to me last year, and the exasperation was clear sort of off the emails, because they had they'd invested in quite a lot of data in their area, and they could see that the maximum speed going through a 20 miles an hour limit area was 70 miles per hour. But because the data from the apparatus is aggregated, you can't see the approximate time when those vehicles are going through. And so while some areas are developing different propositions now, and the police are really keen to look at it in that kind of surgical way, we've still got a mismatch between, like I said, the parish councils and residents' reasonable expectations of what they might expect to come out of the apparatus versus what is actually achievable. So while the police and the RAP team in particular are doing a huge amount of work to police our roads in lots of different ways, working with other partnerships and organisations, whether it's on modern slavery, serious organised crime, or just keeping the traffic flowing, which is also one of their sort of requirements. As I say, we do need to just acknowledge that there's a partnership aspect to this as well, which is particularly relevant to road safety. In terms of drug driving and the effectiveness, so that you'll appreciate that part of this also falls within, very significantly within the partnership space, and particularly within the road safety partnership. The constabulary have started a new reporting tool for members of the public to report anonymously if they know someone who regularly drives under the influence of drink or drugs. I think there are lots of examples where, for example, family members are concerned about if they have a family member who is struggling with substance misuse, then there are sort of subsequent concerns for those family members, and they want a safe way of helping safeguard their loved ones. But also it helps people working within hospitality, nighttime economy and that kind of thing as well. So I can make that link available to you afterwards and circulate it too if that's helpful. That scheme will be fully implemented, fully up and running in time for the Christmas period. That's the first time I've said this word this side of the summer, so that's happened. We also do, within my office, the partnership space and the RAP teams all work to promote the national campaigns against drug and drink driving. Drug driving we know is certainly on the increase. There's a huge amount of work going on, not within the constabulary, the officers themselves, but nationally, around how to get better and more roadside drugs testing, for example. The constabulary currently test roadside for cannabis and cocaine, but the increase is suspected in ketamine and nitrite oxide, which is particularly relevant for our younger drivers, which, as we know, are more likely to be involved in a serious or fatal crash anyway. So we're keen to look for different ways of getting that issue progressed, really. Right, so the question 8 around beat. Oh, I'm just going to have to pull whoever asked this question up slightly. It's been some considerable decades since we've only had policemen, so police officers. But regardless, the number of beat police officers on our streets, wanting to know if that will be increased to improve coverage. This is I'm afraid I'm going to have to answer this question without really answering the question, which is not a position that I particularly enjoy, but it just is more about where we are currently. So I just wanted to give that information. You'll be aware that the national government has a national policing guarantee, which they spoke about a lot during the general election campaign, and then have released the first round of funding for the neighbourhood policing guarantee this year. We're hoping, but it has not yet been confirmed, that there will be rounds of funding each year to release more neighbourhood policing into our communities. My observations are that it's called the neighbourhood policing guarantee for a reason, and that is because we can only spend the money on officers who are going into neighbourhoods, or in ways that then release those officers to then be redeployed into neighbourhood role. So either way, it can only result in an increase in provision in our neighbourhoods. We have in Norfolk quite a small constabulary size. So the practical reality is that the amount of money that we get through is relatively small because our constabulary is relatively small, and it's resulted in 31 additional officers this year. So when you allow for annual leave, shift patterns, all of the usual things that you of course have to take into account with operational sort of requirements, it doesn't mean every day you've got 31 additional officers. Of course not, because we have those shift patterns. But that first wave of new police officers is on the way through. There's obviously always a gap as well between getting the money and getting the officers on the ground because they have to be recruited and trained. But as I said before, we are not suffering from some of the issues on recruitment that other areas might. So I'm optimistic that we're going to see those officers on the ground really quite quickly. Clearly, where and how police officers are deployed is a decision for the Chief Constable, but as you'd expect, he and I speak very often around neighbourhood policing because we both know that it's a critical concern to a lot of people. And I'm encouraged to see the extent that he and that senior team are responding to that and using the mechanisms that the national government is putting in place to good effect in that regard as well. So I'm sorry that I can't be any more specific on that question, but hopefully that's useful nonetheless. Right, so the question 9 regarding the role of police, I'm just going to have a quick slide.
Would you like a break? Would you like some
No.
of us to give you some opinions?
No, I'm good. There's a lot of questions and I'm keen to make sure that I answer all of them. So unless you need a break from my voice, which is also a legitimate response.
No, not at all. We're enjoying every minute. Actually, you're covering a great deal of ground, which will save us having to ask questions at the end. So thank you very much.
Okay. Whenever I give evidence, I normally have 3 cups of tea on the go. So I feel like I'm going to make this one last. Okay, so question 9 in relation to reducing domestic violence. This is a very substantial area of work for the police and for the partners that the police work with. And I don't want to get too diverted at this point, but I'm just going to take the opportunity to have a quick tangential. You know, at the beginning when I was talking about the foreseeable potential effects of local government review, one of the very most, I mean, if not the most critical area of business, to my mind, that has potential for disruption, and I absolutely do not want to see that disruption. I want to do everything in my power to ensure that it is not disrupted, is in the way that domestic abuse is dealt with and people are safeguarded within the county. Now, I should say, I'm not saying that to be a doom monger. I'm saying it's out of candor and to just be clear about that, the role of that partnership within this space, because it is very substantial. There is work going on with there's a working group that has been put in place who are working to look at how to safeguard this continued service provision over this period, which is great. But there are other issues like NIDAS, so you'll be aware of that, which has a county-wide provision that is funded through my office and various district councils, for example. All of those organisations will no longer exist at some point. I do not want NIDAS as a proposition to fall away just because the partner and funding organisations have fallen away. So there's a task and finish group that has been set up within my office. This is just one part of the transition arrangements that need to be put in place to look at how those contracts can be safeguarded over this period, how things like it probably wouldn't be this in contractual sort of terms, but in effect, how things can be novated across into the new entities. Again, it's a really significant piece of work. And I have some peripheral concerns at this point around the continuity of funding of those for, again, what I think are fairly obvious reasons. I think that should be a concern that exercises a lot of us. I would invite you, as I said before, to just engage with that problem in whatever your formal roles are, because this is not a problem that I myself can solve on my own. So with that sort of slightly sort of off-piste bit said, I did want to flag it because the police really rely very heavily on those partnership arrangements like the MASH, like NIDAS, where the ISFAs and IDFAs are provided. They rely on the NHS through the SARC and that forensic sort of provision as well. So that's in terms of how the support and the evidential sort of requirements can be progressed when people come forward. So I'm talking very coldly, it's because that's deliberate. I want to just acknowledge the fact that there is a very significant emotional burden here also. And that is, I do not believe it is hyperbolic to say that that is at the forefront of the police's minds. There has been a huge amount of work done as a result of inspections and thematic inspections by the Inspectorate of the Constabularies around improving in general the police's response. So not Norfolk Constabulary specifically, but all of the constabularies' responses to DA. And I have at every I think at every public accountability meeting that I've had with the Chief Constable, I've either raised questions on behalf of the public or have further kind of interrogated that aspect of policing. I'm really pleased to see how much effort and resource has gone into improving yet further the police response, whether it's through the DA Matters training that's been rolled out to hundreds of police officers. They are looking at exploring more civil orders, and I'm every opportunity I get to have a conversation with the JP, I'm trying to engage with the magistrates on that as well, because clearly with civil orders they have a role to play in that. There is a huge amount of work and focus going on to victim safeguarding, and so I want to just stress that these are force-wide strategies which are being finessed. They're constantly under review and they're being deployed by the constabulary. All of that said, this is happening, yet we know that the numbers of people affected by domestic abuse and domestic violence are really substantial in Norfolk, and I do not want to diminish that at all. The scale of the challenge for the police and the scale of the challenge for the partners working within this area is very, very significant. And so, again, I would advocate very, very strongly for any and all support that you as a district council can provide in that space, particularly over the next 18 months to 2 years. The last thing I want to see is people who are victims or survivors of domestic violence not receiving the support that they need because of the period that we are about to sort of go through. And I'm, excuse me, when resources are stretched anyway, it is already a challenge. So again, I'm just speaking very coldly and with candor because I think it deserves that level of candor, basically. And it would be wrong for me to just say that everything is fine, because the scale of the challenge is very significant.
Madam Chair, can I just intercede if you finish that answer? When we put these questions forward, we all did them individually, so they weren't aggregated to see if there's any commonality. So I submitted 10, 11 and 12. I think your previous answers, you probably covered 10 and 11 anyway. So if it expedites matters, we could just move on to 12. Okay.
All right, thank you. I'm going to cough. As you might expect, though, I can talk all day about speeding, which is probably why it's good to move on. So we'll get some lunch. Right. So question 12 then, in terms of the online crime. This is quite a good example, actually, of, you know, when we were talking, I was talking earlier about the challenge that all the constabularies face in terms of undertaking all of their role. So the high harm, high risk, but also the low harm, low risk, and everything within that spectrum. So when you have limited resources to deploy, how those resources are deployed, I think is a particular challenge for the Chief Constable. We have talked a number of times over my term around the prevention of online crime, but I'm just going to broaden the scope slightly to around fraud, online or offline. Obviously, most of it is on. The number of specific resourcing in Norfolk is smaller than it is in other areas, and that is something that I would love to see changed. That said, clearly, as we have with any other aspect of policing, we're not going to get more police officers in order to do other areas of work. The area of work that the national government is prioritising is neighbourhood policing. So we do have to be very clear-eyed about the fact that it is not in mine or the Chief Constable's power. I'm just going to speak slightly on his behalf, which is hopefully not too out of turn. It isn't possible, it isn't in our gift to just recruit more police officer numbers to then just deploy, because obviously the financial resources are depleted. So what we have in Norfolk, and I'll move on to a more regional response, which you may not be aware of as well. I'll cover that in a moment. So on the cyber perspective, there are 4 members of staff who are dedicated solely to cyber-based online offending. And there are, this is such a niche thing. This is such a police response. I'm going to read it out word for word because this is why I love this. So in addition, he says, we have 35 Norfolk staff members who hold a license for Long Arm, which is the open source investigative tool that we hold across both forces, which is utilised for online based offending. That's like the archetypal police response, which I love. It's such a specific thing. And the reason why this is, I can see a few sort of shaking heads, but this is a really great example, because the fact is that we have people within the service, often staff, and I want to just remind people that we have police officers and we have police staff, and there are thousands of police staff who are doing almost the same work, but with different powers as police officers. What you have is multi-skilled people within the constabulary. So there's sometimes a misunderstanding that if you don't have a team specifically set up to work on a specific area of policing, there's sometimes a conception or a perspective that therefore nothing is done on that aspect. And actually that is not the case. I've tested this with the Chief Constable, I've tested it in public meetings, and I've also had a lot of meetings with relevant officers and staff outside of those areas to kind of examine this. And I can see that what they are trying to do is tool people up as much as possible so that you do, of course, have specialists, but we also in Norfolk have a huge number of people who are generalists. So if I look into, you know, other areas of the world, other sectors, you would have that same split between specialists and generalists, which is great because it means then the Chief Constable and his team has more flexibility in how those people are deployed, which I think on balance is to our benefit. But I do have some sympathy with people who would prefer to see specific teams set up to deal with specific areas of business. So when they're talking about 35 staff members with that license for the investigative work, that basically tells me that we've got about 40 people within the constabulary who are either specialists or generalists who can turn their hand to those kind of investigations as and when, which is helpful. The other aspect, so that's the cyber side. I did want to cover one aspect of policing that I think people understandably prefer not to think about too often, but I'm going to ask you to think about it, which is Norfolk Safeguarding Children Online Team, which is referred to as SCOLT. They are a team that deal with the threat of online child exploitation. So they are tasked with safeguarding children who are online and identifying offenders in order for those offenders to have action taken against them. So without putting too fine a point on it, there are about 50 people, officers and staff, whose task is to review material. And I'm going to leave it at that euphemistically. And I'm very happy to talk with people outside of the public space around what that consists of. That team does phenomenal work, absolutely phenomenal work. I want to just cover two things because, again, people understandably do not have an understanding of what this work is, and nor should you, So the first one is we just deal with the very practical resourcing issues. So when I'm talking about the resource availability within the constabulary as a limiting factor or a potential limiting factor, I'm almost certainly going to get some of these numbers wrong because my power of recall is not perhaps what it should be. From recall, when people are being investigated for online abuse, it is common for around 8 to 12 digital devices to be seized per offender. And all of the material on all of those devices needs to be clearly, securely stored, and it needs to be reviewed for the evidential sort of the threshold needs to be exceeded. The digital requirement to hold that amount of data, we're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of files. That is a phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal amount of content that needs to be held super securely and accessed super securely. And that is just one area of business for the police. And I think the cost of securing that much storage, just that aspect of policing alone, is very significant. And so when we're talking about policing and resource and the capacity for the police to respond to things, I just wanted to flag that all of, if you've worked in business, so if you've got an operational role or you've had a part of your working life where you've had to consider budgets and things like that, the challenge, the budgetary constraints for the police are something else. Just really, really extraordinary. So that's just sort of a niche bit of operational insight, which I hope is useful to you, because as I say, people rightly and understandably do not look at this. The other aspect that the SCOLT team have to deal with, and they're not unusual, it's also for the contact and control room, the people who are answering the phones on the 9s calls, the RAP team I talked about earlier, the roads and armed response teams, who deal with the fatal crashes. They're often first on the scene, or the people dealing with that. People, staff and officers working in any number of roles within the police have an enormous burden of trauma in response to those that work as well. It is inconceivable to my mind that people could go and do that work and not be affected by it. And so it is reasonable and understandable that, of course, people are going to occasionally need time off sick. There needs to be a better response for people working within the constabularies. And again, I'm not singling Norfolk out, just to be super clear. This is an issue nationally, which the NPCC, other organisations are really trying to move forward. I just wanted to be really clear around, because the question asks around the resourcing, the numbers, but I just wanted to bring to life some of the human costs as well, not just from the victim side and the people surviving this, but the practical realities of policing in this space are extremely challenging. For that reason, I am really glad that the regional response to these sorts of crimes also is very good. I spent a day in our regional organised crime sort of unit, the ROCU, which was just fantastic to see all of the work that they do being brought to life. So we have a regional ROCU, they're regional across the country, and their sole work is to work with the partners within that space regionally and at a local level to disrupt organised crime of all types. And so clearly cyber and school fall into that category as well. It is an absolutely phenomenal resource that works very, very closely with Norfolk Constabulary. We've got officers on secondment into the ROCU. They do a huge amount of work. So when in Norfolk, things like courier fraud is disrupted, that is often done in partnership with ROCU officers and staff, not just Norfolk Constabulary sort of working in isolation. So there is that sort of broader picture as well. So really fantastic team and really fantastic resource that's available to us here and which is used to great effect. But as I have to say on all of these occasions, with more still to do, because the work is of course infinite in policing and therefore is infinite in the partnerships that work within these spaces as well. I think that brings me to the end of the questions, so I'll turn my microphone off and drink my tea.
That was fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. I think that was almost everything we would need to know about your role and the state of policing in Norfolk, except some people are going to ask questions, if that's all right. And I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about whether we should think about the areas you think are most at risk with the partnership falling away, whether that's something we should be bearing in mind. Anyway, Councillor Husband.
Fine, thank you very much for your presentation. Can I just come on the speeding issue, but a slightly different way? In my parishes, we have a problem, which is 30-mile-an-hour speed limits and then a country lane, and it's 60. And every time either the chair of the parish council or anybody contacts highways, we have an intellectually retarded view of the road system, because it's always been like that. We've always done it that way. But surely there's 41 of you commissioners with the chief constables. Should you not be lobbying government on the transport department? Because it's not just a case of speeding, it's the idiot way or the idiotic way that we go from a 30 to a 40 to a 50 back to a 30, and then it opens up to a 60 where there's a parking for a walk by a riverside. It's just nonsense. So whilst I accept what you're saying, and many of the parishes are actually using the latest speed cameras in the villages, we're up against this barrier.
Yep, agree. So I'm not pushing back on what you're saying. So I'm going to just split it out into two sort of aspects. The police and crime commissioners, oh my goodness, this is such a massive thing. Like we could just have a chat afterwards about trying to bring enough information into this meeting as well to then help you all. So bring a different perspective. You're going to have to ring a bell at some point to like call time. Right, where to start with this? So let me try and deal with the national bit first, because that's one bit that you alluded to. There really is very significant amounts of work happening at a national level. If I just bring a few bits to light for you, just to give a sense of that. So all of the police and crime commissioners belong to the imaginatively titled Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. That is the space where we get together. It is curiously apolitical, which is fantastic. You'll be aware that I work very closely with my counterpart in Suffolk, Tim Passmore. Those kind of relationships are deliberately cultivated between and by the police and crime commissioners. And one of the ways that that is done sort of structurally as well is that there are different portfolios within the APCC, and there are 2 co-leads for each one. So putting aside that we have 2 currently PCCs who aren't Conservative or Labour, but there is typically a Conservative co-lead and a Labour co-lead on every single of those portfolios. I work with the Plaid co-lead in my national role on the workforce portfolio, for example. So it's not always there, but there's always a political balance at that co-lead sort of aspect. The roads policing portfolio, I am involved with it peripherally. The co-leads on that are Joy Allen, who is Durham Police and Crime Commissioner, and Philip Seckham, who is Warwickshire. Philip was kind enough to accommodate myself and some of the members of the Road Safety Partnership Strategic Board recently, so that I basically arranged a day to help Fire and Rescue, Highways Authority officers understand what Warwickshire are doing within their Road Safety Partnership, because they're about 4 to 5 years ahead of us here in Norfolk. So those two police and crime commissioners are very, very motivated around this. And they have, the APCC provides the secretariat, the administration for those portfolios. So if you wanted to understand what the PCCs are doing at a national level, that's where that kind of advocacy and work is focused. I continue to have a role both with my PCC hat on and then in a sort of curiously hybrid way with slightly a little bit of my old professional hat on as well, just because I've got that knowledge. It's my professional background, so it would be odd if I didn't bring that into this as well. So there's a Parliamentary Advisory Council on Transport Safety. The representatives from the police on that tend to be Jo Shiner, the Chief Constable of West Sussex. She is extremely well known in this space. I chair a working group on work-related road risk. There are working groups that cover in-vehicle safety, kind of every aspect that you could imagine. And the PCCs are really engaged in those spaces as well. And then, as the title suggests, there is ministerial and Department for Transport engagement with the Parliamentary Advisory Council as well. So that kind of sits alongside and separate to the work of the PCCs. But that is definitely part of the business that we undertake. The NPCC, so the National Police Chiefs Council, are also represented, not necessarily just through Jo and her work, but individual chief constables or their ACCs often sit on these working groups and advisory groups as well. So there is a joining up of perspectives, and the operational and the strategic is coming through there as well. So that's sort of the national side of things.
Can I interrupt you slightly, because the clock will stop ticking. You'll be glad to know. And we've got one more question. So could I just suggest, if you've got any more queries about that, Councillor Housden, you take it off. It was a brilliant explanation and it's really important. We take your point very seriously. Councillor Cushing?
Thank you for your presentation. I represent North Fakenham, and indeed I've actually invited you to come and visit North Fakenham, which your office has kindly accepted. So just looking forward to the date to go into the diaries. But the main thing I want to talk to you about is about speeding, which was following on really. Is it's certainly the major issue in the town at the moment. We have a main artery that runs across my ward, which goes from the King's Inn Road to the Norwich Road, and we have people going down there up 60 miles an hour at times. But unfortunately, they're doing it early in the morning or late in the evening when there are no police around, which comes back to the officer numbers. So actually, when you do come, probably an answer for now, but when you do come, I would be interested to hear your thoughts in terms of your experience and background about the other methods that can be used in order to put in place measures which will actually stop that speeding.
This is quite handy. You've given me, thank you, Councillor Cushing, you've given me an opportunity just to give a little bit more information around the local provision as well. So in my first sort of pass at the questions, I mentioned some differences between the highway authorities. Now, this is a tricky one for me to answer because my endeavour is always to talk on the basis of objective fact and not political, because it's my professional background. That's what I want to bring into this particular question. So your question around speed limits, and I think this is adjacent to your question as well. It's sort of pointing to the same problem. Yeah, well, there we go. So, but I imagine everybody will have areas in your wards where this is like, why is this a national speed limit? It makes no sense. You know, that kind of question that your residents will be asking as well. So in Norfolk, I mean, this is very well documented. It is in almost every statement that is issued whenever the EDP or the BBC asks them a question. They refer to the speed limits are set in accordance with national guidance. That tends to be the statement. So my response to that is, it's guidance. It's guidance. It's not a standard. There is absolutely no reason why Norfolk couldn't do something different if it wanted to. And so this is where I say, from my perspective, I mean, I know I live here, but professionally, I've worked in other areas. So professionally, when I've looked at other areas and then I've looked from the outside looking into Norfolk, if you get my drift, there's just seemed to be a bit of a mismatch, and we definitely do not do things in the same way that other areas do. It is, if Norfolk County Council, if the local members wanted to prioritise road safety, it is in their gift to change things like the speed limit setting policy. It is absolutely in their gift to do that. It is absolutely in the officer's gift to facilitate them doing that. So the two that always spring to mind, I should probably do, only because I worked there just before this job. West Sussex have reviewed their speed limit setting policy, and Oxfordshire as well. Now, forgive me if I'm misremembering this, I don't believe Oxfordshire's underlying policy is actually publicly available, so forgive me if that is the case. I'm pretty confident that West Sussex's is. The West Sussex one is of interest to me, though, because the problems that you both have kind of identified is this sort of mismatch between the speed limits that are set versus how an environment feels. Gets to exactly the heart of the West Sussex speed limit policy that's been provided, and they've acknowledged as a highway authority that it's got to feel appropriate. We know I know that, let's just say there were some issues in its execution, right, in Wales with the reduction in speed limit there. Putting that to one side, we know that just signs on poles reduce speeds. We know that, we can see that in the data that's come out of Wales. So as I say, put the execution of that to one side, but the outcome has been to see a reduction in speeds. So, which is why I'm just trying to separate out the two. If we want to prioritise road safety politically, then we can do that, because we can rest assured that the officers executing that political will have the power to change the speed limit setting and other policies as well, because it's based on guidance, not standards. So sorry if that's a slightly sort of curious way of coming at it, but ultimately the enforcement has to respect the speed limits that are there. The enforcement, you're right, there are issues around the shift patterns, the numbers of people that we have and all the rest of it. But ultimately, if the speed limits aren't appropriate and set in a way that facilitates road safety and safer environments, then the enforcement is going to only ever be able to chase it. Do you see what I mean? Yeah.
Thank you very much. We've got two questions have slipped in, I'm afraid. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's nice to see you again, Sarah. We met at the bottom meeting that you referred to earlier, so it's nice to see you and thank you for giving up your time. Just following on from the Welsh experiment, if I can call it that. I attended a meetings about road safety, in particular following the death of a teenager in Suffield a few years back, was hit by a speeding motorist while cycling through the village. And we were banging on for about an hour and a half at that meeting, and the Welsh had just introduced a fortnight previously the scheme for 20 miles an hour in villages. We know it's been found wanting because it was perhaps progressed too widespread too quickly. There was widespread, using that word again, opposition by the previous government to a similar scheme in England and Wales. But at no time was it mentioned that we had the ability to break loose on national speed limit setting and do our own thing here in Norfolk. So can I put the question to you that if we went down that road, pardon the pun, would you be supportive of a scheme similar to the Welsh, which cuts through red tape, because what we find in parishes is that they can't afford the equipment because they've not got enough money in the bank. They can't get sufficient parish partnership money or the slush fund that the county council has got to put. So Speedwatch falls by the wayside because, for the reason that you gave, it doesn't trip through the data, doesn't make any change because it's not effective enough. So do you see part of the solution for improved road safety as cutting through those financial limitations and doing something similar to what the Welsh did?
Right. How do I answer this in a way that is the execution of the Welsh experiment? I think that's exactly the right word for it, because it did start as a bit of a trial, in all ways. We know that has worked. I think if we're serious about road safety, then, I mean, ultimately, the job of the roads transport should be to enable the human need to travel without dying or sustaining a serious injury. And my feeling on that is that we have to understand that we're dealing with people, not robots. People make mistakes. Those mistakes and errors of judgment are normally pretty foreseeable. People tend to make the same sort of mistakes. They tend to speed, they tend to do errors of judgment. You know, they don't get their eyes tested or whatever. But the whole point is that when somebody makes a mistake or when they've got an error of judgment, that should not result in somebody dying or sustaining a life-sustaining injury. And so the way that we, the sector, so beyond all of us in this room, beyond the police, you know, the way that we need to really approach that problem is actually one of physics. Our bodies are really vulnerable. They're soft, you know, we get bruised and battered. We know what, put very plainly, we know what kills people, and it's energy. So what we need to do is make our roads more survivable when those crashes occur. We're not going to the fool's errand to think that we're going to get rid of all the crashes. But what we should be able to do, because we've seen this happen in other areas, and Norfolk is a county with a rising number. We've got more people dying or being seriously injured on our roads now, which is not what I want to see. We see falling trends in other areas. And the way that we do that is by looking at things like speeds, because we know that if you're going at, just to be very sort of extreme about it, if you're going at 20, any crash that you have is likely for most people to fall into the category of just being a bit of hassle. You know, you're walking away with a bit of a bruised wrist maybe, but you're walking away from it. You're having a conversation with the other party and then getting on with your day, maybe with a trip to Quick Fit. If you're going at 60, the outcome is going to be really, really different and much more catastrophic. So speeds are the single biggest way. They're not the only way. They're part of the system approach, but they're the single biggest way that we can make those crashes more survivable. And so if we approach it like that, then actually we should be looking at different approaches. We should be looking at our policies. We should be talking with parish councils, where parishes, I've had so many letters from parish councils in South Norfolk, North Norfolk, it's everywhere. It's not to do with one particular district where they've got a school with a 40 miles per hour limit outside of it, and it doesn't make sense to the parents there. Well, if it doesn't make sense to you and you live there, chances are it wouldn't make sense to people driving through there as well. So I would advocate for, for example, in Oxfordshire, I think they had maybe 240 or so parishes look at changing the speed limits within their own villages to 20s with the highway authority, because the parish council wanted that reduction. And so the speed limit setting policy enabled that to happen, rather than it being, as Councillor Houseman was saying, this sort of barrier to it happening. The Welsh one, I do agree with you to a certain extent. I think my sort of view on it is that there needs to be a speed limit setting in place, possibly by national government, my sense is going to be more likely to be done at a local level because the highway authorities have that power, which respects how roads are used, not just, you know, like, are they streets? Are they in our villages? Are they a big dual carriageway between towns? Because the speed limits should be appropriate for how the roads are used, not just the traffic that they happen to carry. So I wouldn't advocate for something exactly like the Welsh sort of system, you know, in terms of that blanket coverage. I think we definitely can learn from the lessons from that. But I think we should be looking at this much more sort of clear-eyed at how we can use those policies to bring about positive change in our communities.
You've given us some food for thought. Councillor Bedrinson, have you got a really quick question? Thanks.
It is a really quick one. Sarah, it's great to see you again. Can we have a follow-up meeting, because we had one ages ago, around second homes council tax and what that can mean to reducing domestic abuse and for temporary accommodation?
Yes. And I should just say, although I try and make sure I say this everywhere, sometimes people, I mean, we all do it. We just have this thing at the back of our minds and we mean to do it and we never get around to it because there's 20 other things that we need to do.
Thank you.
At any time, if you've got anything which affects your residents or an item of curiosity that you just want to know a bit more information about, please feel free to get in touch with me. The best way of doing it is through my office email address, because then they track it, they make sure that nothing goes accidentally AWOL. So please email into the office, and I literally look at everything that comes through, and we will certainly, I'm very glad to set up further sort of meetings. And if you just want a bit of a thought about something, or a bit of, you know, what's the best thing that I can look at for this, then if I don't know, somebody in my office will. So I'm very happy to put that sort of resource to helping you in your roles as local members as well. So please do make use of that.
Well, thank you very much indeed. You've given us a lot of information. I think there are some things we could take forward, such as the concerns about the partnership working and making sure things don't disappear, as far as it's within our gift, of course, and the advocacy for changing speed limit policy in an en masse rather than on a one-to-one basis. But I'm not necessarily sure this is the right forum for it, but I do think you've given us quite a lot of food for thought that we could actually work with productively. Thank you very much indeed for coming. Really appreciate your time. That would be lovely. Would you like another cup of tea before you go? Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for coming. Thank you. Talking about cups of coffee, do people want a cup of coffee before we go on? So if we reconvene at, sorry? You need all right, okay. Too much information. I'll be very generous and give it till 11:30 if that's all right. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody. So now agenda item 10, reporting progress on implementing the corporate plan 23 to 27. And we have officers Fredrickson for change and Blash to help us with this.
So, as you can see, members, before you, we have the updates for quarter four, January to March 2025. So, that's for your perusal, and we're here to answer any questions that you might have on this report. Thank you.
Okay, members, do we have any questions? Councillor Fletcher? Can I remind you to put your microphone on? Because I'm forgetting mine all the time. So just.
Pardon, sorry, excuse me. Yes, I think this is on page 24. This is it's perhaps a small matter, but I mean it's the issue of household waste, which seems to be green and in progress, and yet there are obviously problems, especially financial problems, associated with implementing this plan, which we have canvassed in the past. And I just wondered why, therefore, it's a green rather than an amber, given that there do seem to be problems actually of financing it.
So the legislation requires us to introduce a green food waste scheme from next April. We have ordered the refuse freighters that would allow us to do that. We've implemented a commercial food waste scheme this summer for commercial businesses. Any business in the district with more than 10 employees does need to engage in recycling or have recycling. And so we've introduced a food waste scheme. So notwithstanding the uncertainties around the true and actual cost, we have moved forward with the placing of orders to introduce food waste collections from next year. So that's why it's green.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Fletcher?
The issue will be reported through Cabinet moving forward. Councillor Ringer, the portfolio holder, is working with your officers in terms of the detailed planning and rollout. Once the delivery date for the refuse freighters is confirmed, and Councillor Shires and Mr. McCullum, Director of Resources, Section 151 officer, will obviously be looking at the financial aspects and whether there is any gap that we need to make up beyond the new burdens funding which the government has awarded to us.
But I mean, it actually can be delivered on time, obviously, as yeah, right. Okay.
Decisions have been taken to place the orders for the refuse freighters,
yes,
and decisions are being taken in respect of the food caddies, both domestic and ones which you would place or residents would place at the curbside. The actual date and the planning of introduction and the planning of rounds will depend upon the notice that we get about the delivery of the vehicles. Obviously, I think there's 160 odd councils that are having to introduce food waste at the same time. So there is pressure in the supply chain, both for freighters and for the food caddies.
Right. Okay.
Councillor Hasden?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just turn to page 33? I know we've had Anglian Water here, but I see that the energy infrastructure, we've been suffering a lot of power cuts in Fakenham. Some of them last for a few seconds and some of them last for a few minutes, and then the power comes back on again. So far, I haven't been able to find out and get any sensible answers from anybody, but this has been a very regular occurrence. I mean, 2 or 3 in a week, and everything goes off and then it's back on again. And I wonder if we're addressing that, or if any inquiries are being made or any discussions with the statutory authorities are happening.
I'm not aware of the incidents that you refer to, Councillor Housen. We continue with partners to highlight both the deficiency in the UK power networks infrastructure within the district, and obviously increasing concern around water scarcity and availability. The Environment Agency have undertaken reviews of abstraction licenses in the River Rant catchment, which has had an impact on businesses in that location, and strategies have been put in place around seasonal rainwater reservoirs. And there has been some investment by Anglian Water to strengthen domestic supplies in that area. A similar process of review is now being undertaken in respect of abstraction licenses in the Wensum Valley. So we are engaged with partners in terms of an energy plan for Norfolk and with Anglian Water in respect of water resilience moving forward. But I don't know the issues that you've referred to in recent times in Fakenham.
Can I ask if you could send me just a quick email on that, because I am meeting with some of the energy companies on Friday.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's affecting a lot of people and our neighbours, and we've been away for quite a long time in the summer, but they were having 3 or 4 of these a week.
Okay, but if you could do that for me,
Yeah.
I'll be meeting with them and Mr. Latch on Friday, so
Fine, okay.
thank you.
Councillor
Thank
Cushing.
you.
Thank you. Can I go to page 38 and action number 42? It says produce an organisational development plan which is to be prepared by June 2024. I know this is green, but we are now 15 months on from June 2024 and no sight of seeing that plan. And so I guess what does success look like, and when are we going to actually see the plan?
Well, the updated comment is on the red column on the right hand side of the table. The work was undertaken in respect of the recommendations made from the corporate peer review. We obviously LGR has then come into effect in terms of the process that we need to engage. That raises some staffing issues, and so we have amended the draft document, and I understand it's going to be presented to you in November.
Can I have another bite of the cherry?
Yes.
If we're moving on to the next year, I have a question on number 6, if I may. Just wonder, because it says it's talking about rural position statement, which should be done by August 2025. So just wonder whether that had been done. But the other question I have is, I notice RAG status amber, but I don't look from the descriptive narrative in the comment column. I don't actually understand why it's amber.
Okay, so as following the government's English devolution white paper published last December, which introduced devolution and local government reorganisation, we've had to look at the organisational capacity that we have, both at an officer and member level. So there were 45 actions in the corporate plan, annual plan for 24-25, and we've reduced them to 30 in 25-26. There has been some baseline data being gathered in respect of rural community services across the district, but that position is changing frequently. We now, when National Westminster closes in Cromer, and I think Lloyd's closes in North Horsham, we won't have any high street banks left in the district. So we are obviously working around banking hubs, and there is positive progress being made in that respect. We've obviously seen a loss of the closure of Blakeney surgery. We have lost a number of post offices and village shops. So this position isn't static, it is dynamic, and it is in some respects gathering pace. So we have tried to reflect those issues in our engagement and the development of our proposal for local government reorganisation, but we haven't moved that to an actual strategy for North Norfolk. What we will probably do is place that baseline data in the context of any emerging unitary authorities as sanctioned by government in due course.
Councillor Hankins.
Thank you, Chair. Page 33, the item on mobile connectivity. I see it's green, and I understand that the data has now been collected, and therefore we know something of the not spots, etc. I think the next stage will be to assess what we do about it. And I think that's quite important. And I would propose that we look very carefully at the not spots in relation to health, in particular with the non-accessibility of defibrillators, certainly in some of my parishes where in order to access the medical information required, they have to go to a local kiosk in order to obtain that. And the other thing, so I would suggest there are two priorities in looking at this. And the second one is business. There are local businesses that have extreme difficulty in obtaining any kind of internet signal in order to carry out their business. So I would suggest, and I think this will be adopted, that there is an action plan prepared by this committee to that effect. So I think it's being very sort of ambitious, but I think that's what's required. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hankins. I think that's on the agenda for later on when we're talking about our work programme. We have a scoping document to look at that. But I had a question. It was an action for 24-25, the developing the deeper insight into mobile and fast internet coverage. I couldn't see whether it was carried forward into 25-26, but I may just have missed it.
I believe that's the next part of the report, because this is a retrospective report, isn't it?
I couldn't find it in the feature report, as it were, but maybe I just missed it.
I don't know, but it is. I don't know whether there's a specific action. I apologise, but I can confirm that the data has been gathered. A number of members on the committee and beyond have fed in their experiences of not spots in terms of both digital and mobile and digital infrastructure. So I know that work has been done to bring together that information. It hasn't yet been developed as a strategy or action plan, but the data has been brought together.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bayes?
Yeah, page 34, number 33. I'm looking at the actions of that against the objectives. And I just feel that the actual, although it's green, the information received in the comments from the officer is quite vague in terms of what the outcome's been, because it doesn't really cover the action or the objectives. All it says is it's conducted an audit with 83 businesses.
So I think perhaps a written response to that, because I don't actually know what has happened there. I can speak from experience that we are engaged with a task force with the East of England Energy Group, and it's called the Skills Hackathon. So we are engaging with that, and I'm talking to colleges and local training providers. So we're going to bring them back together. So that will feed into this piece of work. But I believe that would be something for Stuart Quick or John Toy to answer, if that's okay.
I just feel it's quite vague, really, from what it says down there. It doesn't really give the depth of information that you've just alluded to.
Okay, so let's do that. I'll get that report done for you from John Toy and Stuart Quick. Thank you.
Councillor Cushing?
Thank you. With no more questions, I have another one. Go to page 53, item number 26, LGA Corporate Period Challenge Plan. It's amber and it says there's been some slippage, but do we know the impacts, what actually has slipped and what the impact of that will be?
I refer to your previous question in terms of the learning, the workforce strategy. It's that piece of work that's outstanding.
And just on that point as well, I believe that ONS, we're going to have time schedules for each item, and that seems to have fallen off the agenda. Is that coming back, Madam Chair?
Thank you very much indeed. We had noted that, and it's not updated on the action plan, but we can hopefully get that corrected. But there was another thought I had, which was comparing 24-25 and 25-26, whether the actions would have the same numbers and there could be a little bit more consistency, because it's quite difficult to jiggle between them and actually find out what's what.
It's not easy to do that, and in that we've obviously reduced from 46 to 30. So there is commentary around where we've moved them forward from one to the other, but it isn't. It's not as easy as doing that, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much.
I mean, we have had the government's position in promoting local government reorganisation has to be seen as having a very significant impact on our organisational capacity. I mean, you know, myself and the leader of the council, probably 60% of our time since the beginning of June has been committed to the LGR submission, which obviously you'll discuss at full council next Wednesday. We are having to, but that's just in terms of the submission. We're having to look at our position around use of assets, engagement with our communities, that workforce planning. There is a lot that is behind and underneath this that is impacting on our corporate capacity. And that's why the annual action plan for 25-26 is scaled back from you know, by over a third, from 45 down to 30 actions. And we've had to do that in a way that is transparent. And this is around these are, I suppose, the administration's manifesto or program of work, but that is in addition to business as usual. So we have to maintain all our current services, and then, you know, we've had difficult conversations as a leadership team with the cabinet around what we can do with that additional headroom and capacity, given this additional work that has come from having to prepare a submission for local government reorganisation. And so this reflects what we feel we could achieve with the resources that we have, staff and finances, but it is stretched, and that's why it has been scaled back from 25-26, 24-25.
Thank you very much. Councillor Boyle, did you have your hand up? Thank you. It's page 41, the 25-26 action plan. Number one, the North Norfolk local plan. I see it's amber, and we're hoping to formally adopt the plan by December 2024. Do we feel we're on track? No, it's the amber. We feel we're on track for the timescale. I realise some of it's out of our control as well, isn't it, with the inspector?
Well, we do have the expert in the room, Councillor. If I may, if I may ask Councillor Brown to give us a brief explanation of where we are with the local plan.
We're, I think this week, in fact, just coming to the conclusion of the final public consultation, and the responses to that consultation. I think at last check last week, we'd had 34 responses from the public, so they will be analysed in tabular form. The responses to the individual queries will be logged on our website and reported into the Inspector David Reid. He will then look at the main modifications which these responses feed into, and he will come back to us, I would imagine, in the next sort of 6 weeks or so. And we hope that the inspector will be satisfied with the updating of some of the expert reports that we've had to do, because the process, you know, takes such a long time to come to fruition. So data needs to be updated. But subject to those two things, we would expect progress to go forward to an indication in either November or December that the inspector is satisfied with our local plan. Hallelujah, because we put forward our draft back in April 23. And it will enable us to adopt a made local plan by the end of this year. That's what we expect to be able to, report on later in the year.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. A question?
Thank you. I have another one if I may. Going to page 52, item number 24. It's talks about the development pipeline project proposals for looking at service deployment plan. It says it's green, but do we have a deadline when we might actually see that?
I'll take that away and give it a written answer because it is something that we are talking to the cabinet about at the present time.
Thank you. This is page 44, number 8. Health, wellbeing and financial inclusivity initiatives. With partners, we will continue to pursue funding opportunities to develop initiatives, health prevention. And I see it's amber, and it's a really difficult field to be in at the moment with so many things changing. We hear from the police this morning, the police and crime commissioner, about her concerns about what happens when we come to the end of our local government reorganisation. And of course, we're working with partnership with the ICBs, and they've just had a 50% cut. And I think it's a very difficult nettle to grasp, and to try and put a rag rating on. But how do you feel? Are you fairly confident in the unknown?
I think it's a moving target at the moment because I know the ICB are having a huge restructure, so are the NHS. So what we pride ourselves on at North Norfolk District Council is we have the Health and Wellbeing Partnership, where we bring those organisations together along with the VSC organisations, and we discuss these things and lobby for them. As you heard this morning, it looks like the Office of the Police Crime Commissioner is going to go underneath mayoral authority, and I believe that there are discussions at the moment about the ICB doing the same. But again, it's a moving target thing. But what I can say is that we're in those discussions with the North Norfolk Health and Wellbeing Board, which in turn reports into the Norfolk Health and Wellbeing Board. And I know that you're on the Norfolk Health and Overview and Scrutiny Board at county as well. So there's a lot of moving parts to this, but we are keeping on.
Thank you.
I had a sort of overarching question. The capacity issue is obviously a big moment with LGR, and in 24-25, 31 actions were carried forward, updated or cancelled due to changed circumstances. And I just wondered, is that sufficiently represented in the corporate risk register, where we have an inherent risk score of 12 with a residual and target of 8? Do you think that's sufficient given the impact it's having?
So I've said what the corporate plan is relative to business as usual. It's a corporate plan is a statement of the administration's program of work, and then that's translated into a plan in terms of what organisationally with the staff resources and the financial resources we have, and because of the lessons we learned with COVID, where the corporate plan that was agreed in 2019 was for a four-year period, and then 9 months in, we had a global pandemic, and so the focus of the organisation, every organisation had to change. So in advising this administration that was elected in 2023, it was agreed that the corporate plan, vision and ambition would be shared over the 4 years, but there would be an annual delivery plan put in place to reflect changing positions. We obviously knew in May 2023, when this administration was elected, or this council was elected, that there would be a parliamentary election during 2024, and that would most likely see refreshed national agenda, revised policy, and that is clearly what has come to pass. A number of the objectives, to address the context that you've asked, a number of the objectives are not in the total control of this authority. So, the issue that was raised, the question that was asked about mobile and digital infrastructure, we can be an advocate, we can lobby, but we don't have the tools and levers that allow us to address that issue ourselves. The same around market town health and vibrancy and the provision of banking services. Those are things that we can look to influence, facilitate, advocate for through our planning process. If we had properties that we owned, we may be able to bring those forward more quickly. We have engaged with Cash Access UK and Link to explore potential availability of premises in a number of market towns, but ultimately it's not in our gift to deliver. And I agree with everything Councillor Fredericks has said in responding to the question around the ICB capacity. We changed that to amber because we know that the ICB is going through a very significant process of restructuring. So the staff that our staff are engaging with are going through that change and uncertainty. And so there isn't that pure focus or sole focus on delivering those outcomes. And so we felt in preparing this report that it was right to move that objective to amber, but it's not totally in our control or gift to manage that. In terms of the corporate risk register, it is reviewed quarterly by the corporate leadership team. And I know it wasn't reported to GRAC in June, but it was in September last week. It is important that we are mindful of those issues, but that risk can change almost at any time. We didn't know that LGR was going to be there, so that has had to be changed. We didn't know when we prepared the risk register last year that the Chancellor was going to introduce new national insurance contributions, and so we've had to factor that into our budget and those sort of things. So the corporate risk register is there to inform your decision making, to inform our risk appetite, but it is a dynamic. It's not something that is agreed and then remains. It is a living document, as indeed is the corporate plan. And so I think it has to be seen in that context. But through GRAC, through yourself, Chair, if you feel that the scores that are given to the corporate risks, of which I think there are probably 24 or 30 that are live because some have been removed. And so to go back to your point about can there be a read across from one year to another, what we've done with the corporate risk register is we haven't renumbered, but the numbers now aren't consequential because where a corporate risk has been removed, most recently in respect of the Cromer Munsley Coast Defence Scheme, because it's been completed, because we had the funding package in place, that's been removed from the corporate risk register because it's no longer a significant corporate risk. But we've obviously added local government reorganisation onto that list. I think it's number 41, because that's something that is new. And so that living document, that dynamism of that risk assessment is reflected in that way. It's not quite so easy to do with a read across with the annual action plans.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
I think, we have to understand that our main priority is to serve the public, serve our residents and keep the council ticking along safe, secure and financially stable. And everything else we have to look at in detail to see, can we deliver that? Have we got the capacity? Have we got the resources for that? So that's what we're trying to achieve at the moment.
Thank you very much. It's good to know. So are there any more questions from members? Councillor Bob.
Just one quick question. Page 48. Firstly, I must say congratulations to our is it the empty homes or network, the public finance award. I noticed that we got the best use of media award, and you know, it has been high profile. I know that the empty homes success over the last year. But I noted there's one quick thing. Did note that the software, there's been a problem, and that they're still waiting for it to be resolved. And are we able to be working through it with it, or has it produced an absolute stop? Is there a way around the software?
Thank you, Councillor Bull. It's just in those difficult, complex cases that we're having issues with. So they're being done by hand rather than putting through software at the moment. So they're still being dealt with. It's just taking a little bit longer because, as you can understand, a lot of cases are very complex in this area. But we're looking at the real complex ones that we can't put through that software. So we're doing it by hand instead. Thank you for your congratulations. We'll pass that on to the Empty Homes Officer.
Thank you. Yes, I'm glad that doing it by hand still is something we have the capacity to do. So thanks. Thank you for that.
Thank you all very much. Well, if that's all the questions, are we content to agree that we've received the report and made our comments, and is that sufficient for today? Okay, lovely. Thank you very much indeed for your help with that one. Right, so now we go on to budget monitoring. Yes, Councillor Shaz. Can we welcome you to the front? Lovely. Thanks very much.
Good morning. No, well, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. So this is period 4. This is the first monitoring that we've done since we set the budget back in February. Now that does seem like quite a long time ago. So this is the second budget that we've set in our term, but it'll be the third budget that we monitored. The first budget that we monitored was set before everybody was re-elected or elected for the first time. If you remember last year, we made a change in the way that we're monitoring the budget, where we've monitored with a projection to year end. So when we did the outturn this time last year, there was a deficit of about 1.3 million. And that obviously helped us all see the focus across the organisation. And when we did the outturn, if you remember, I think that was July, you'll remember that we were able to put 600,000 into the general reserves to help with any buffers and curveballs that the government do tend to throw, particularly when it gets to Christmas and earlier in the new year. And if you remember, when we set the budget in February, we also created a new reserve to support with our homelessness budgets. That's the Second Homes Premium, which is, I think, page 86 of the report, and there's 515,000 in there. So that's the buffers that we have going through the financial year, depending on what gets thrown at us, when it gets thrown at us, and then obviously when we go into setting the budget in the year following, we've obviously got a little bit of wiggle room, I will call it there. So when we look at this report, you'll see that we're currently projecting a small surplus for the year end of 138,000. Everything in here is detailed, so you'll know where that's coming from currently, and you'll note that recommendations B and C is nothing that we're doing. We're just changing some money under a budget heading. So that's not extra money that we're being asked to put in. We're just moving some money around. I don't think I've got any colleagues that sat on the Constitution Working Party with me yesterday, although Emma, sitting at the back, may remember some of the conversation that we had about the detail in how we budget monitor. And you will see that any variation, there's a written note next to, which should help explain it. And that's in varying degrees. So it's all in there. If you have any questions, I will gladly answer them. And obviously, if we've got anything technical, Dan will gladly assist.
Thank you for the report. It's very clear. Do I have any questions? Councillor Cushing?
Thank you. Thank you, thank you for that, Councillor Shahs. Interesting you make reference to past estimates, because obviously you'll be aware that the outturn last year, we had a variance of 22%, which equated to 4.75 million. Which was at the time, I think most of us raised our eyebrows at such a scale of that variance. So if you're talking today about potentially estimating a positive variance of 138,000, I mean, what confidence can we have that actually it'll be any of the figures that we've got before us will be anywhere remotely accurate, or at least something that we can hang our hats on going forward?
So I'm confident that where we are right now is what we believe is going to happen. Every single person in the organisation is working towards the end goal of a balanced budget towards the end, you know, no overspends, no surplus. And we know historically we can control what we've got internally. But as you heard in the previous presentation, we've got food waste collections coming. So that's going to add some changes going along the way. If everything was within our control and completely stable, yes, absolutely, we would be where we should be by year end. But as we know, we don't adjust the budget as we go forward. We set it in February. And if we knew what was going to be happening 12 months on, I'm sure that we all wouldn't be in local government. We would be somewhere else if we had that power. So where I sit here today, I'm completely confident in the figures that we've got, as is Dan and Don, our 151 officer. We're sitting here presenting this with complete confidence. What happens tomorrow, the months afterwards, we don't have as much control over. We can only control what we can control in-house.
Thank you. If I might just come back, you're quite right. I mean, they are estimates, so you would expect some variance, but I would possibly those variants be in possibly the hundreds of thousands, but I would not be expecting to see variances of millions going forward like we had last year. But
no, absolutely. So when we set the budget in 24-25, we had a view of what we were going to be spending our money on, and we changed the way we were monitoring the budget. And I was quite open with everybody about that, because I felt in previous monitoring we'd get further down the budget monitoring process and we would see a deficit growing, and that was obviously alarming to everybody. And we have worked collectively, and thank you to the committee for doing so, to help us have a better handle on it early. So we've got an early warning sign of what we need to do as an organisation. And last year is testament to how well that really worked. You know, we could see the collective push from officers in the building to steer us towards where we needed to be, but also it helped steer our decision making in year, because we had a vision on where we knew we were going to be with the estimates we had. So I think that was the first year we trialled that. And I sat here at period 4 last year, and we all sat here period from, oh my goodness, this is where we're headed. But you could see as we went on through the monitoring process collectively that we improved the position. Now, what I'm not saying is hands off, we don't need to do anything. I'm never going to say that, because we're looking at when we set the budget this year, what we were estimating our deficit would be in the next financial year, which was about 900,000, if I give or take. So it's not just this current year that we have to think about, it's next year. And when the government say, you know, fair funding review, we know that disproportionately we were penalised for being a rural district council in the last lot of funding announcements. And I can't sit here and say the government, despite them saying that they value local government, I can't say that they truly do. So I can't say that even if we get to the end of this financial year and we're spot on to every penny, I can't say that the government aren't going to do something going into the next financial year that will create financial instability when it comes to budget setting. So it's, whilst we are in year, and apologies to Dan, we got this budget done and we're already meeting about the next year's budget. We've been meeting since late May, early June about it. It's not just this financial year that we've got to worry about, it's next year and every year we have until whatever local government looks like locally. So it is, as ever, very, very movable, but I'm hopeful that we had our first year of, oh, this is what budget monitoring looks like when we're projecting to year end. And now we're in a second year, which should not be as scary because we all know the drill.
I had a couple of questions. In the use of reserves appendix D, page 85, environmental health are expecting to spend 500,000. What is that on?
Sorry, you mean the in-year, the fifth column in, yeah?
Yep.
Just give me 1 second. I wish I'd have brought a copy of the budget with me for when we set it. So that is a cost that we decided something would be funded from the budget. And I don't have Steve Holmes in the room. So that would be something that when we set the budget in February, we knew part of it would be funded from reserves. So that's not a new change. That's where we were when we set the budget in February. I can get an exact written. I'm just trying to massively remember.
Written would be fine.
Yeah, okay.
And also on page 87, the top line from the savings, appendix E, dog and litter bins. Is that the actual saving? Because the cost is much greater, isn't it? But for a lift of a dog or a litter bin?
So there was a slight increase, wasn't there, in the charges for emptying. So that is the income that we were predicting we would make with that small charge. Yeah.
Councillor Bayes?
Yeah, sorry, I can't find it. It was under general fund summary. I just wondered how many of the council tax comes from second homes. Is there a breakdown of that?
Oh, okay. So so in that amount, you mean? So if you look on page number 86, we have the second homes premium reserve, second one up. And that's where we've taken our share of the second homes council tax and popped that in a reserve, because when we undertook the second homes council tax levy, we had said the purpose of us doing that is to support our families that are facing homelessness and housing crisis. So we have taken that and put it in a pot specifically, because if you remember, I've come almost year after year, it feels like, saying that we're going to be overspent because the need is greater than the budget we've got. So we increased the budget, I think, to 1.3 million, if I can remember correctly, when we set the budget, and then we've created the additional reserve. Does that answer your question?
Councillor Fletcher?
Sorry, can I have a couple of things? One is simply a request for information. I probably know the answer to it anyway. It's on the bottom of page 85. Obviously, there's a vast amount of money that's suddenly going to be spent under extended responsibility producer, which I assume is that for the removal of domestic waste again? It's at the bottom of page 85, the last item, called extended responsibility producer. It's a little bit enigmatic. Well, to my ear.
I believe that's food.
It says earmarking of money to be received in relation to packaging, waste collection and disposal costs. And it's a vast sum of money. It's like, well, 1.6 million or something.
I believe that's food waste.
That's sorry?
Food waste.
Yeah, I thought it would. The other one is again a very small amount of money. Is and perhaps this isn't relevant for this context. It's on page 89, and that's the removal of the youth council budget, which is 9,000 quid, which is not very much money. So I mean, I can see why it's been sort of removed as a saving. I just wondered about the judiciousness of actually curbing potential interest in young people in local government, which seems to be something one would actually need to foment, especially as it only costs 9,000 quid. but I might be being very naive.
No, not at all, not at all. So I think, I want to say it was about 2019, 2020. I might be incorrect. It was one of the proposals that I put forward actually to create a youth council. My vision for what the youth council would be didn't really work for our young people who are exploring life and education and doing amazing things, and to ask them to carve out the time to come here and to be part of meetings. I know Officer Denny worked incredibly hard trying to create a system that worked for our young people, and obviously young people pursue different things all the time. So expecting young people to be as excited about democracy in the format that we know it, where we sit in a chamber and we have debate and we have conversation and we pledge that time, didn't really work for our young people. So Councillor Varley, who's not here, has reached out to our schools to see if we can figure out an alternative model.
Oh, right. Okay, so there is an alternative.
No, so the budget has been reduced because the money that we were putting for travel costs and other things isn't really there at the moment. So we need to rethink about how do we, instead of what the government are doing, remove democracy from a very local level and pull it up to a larger authority. How do we actually make democracy truly local for young people with an area that they serve and live and study in, rather than expect them to behave in the way that we do when it comes to local government. You know, we have to be steered by young people. So Councillor Varley has been in contact with schools to try and figure out what's going to work for young people in a way that does excite them, but the turnover that we have of young people in a way that there's continuity.
That's great. Okay, thanks. Thanks.
Any more questions on the budget? No? If you look at page 57, we are asked to recommend to full council to note the content of the report and the current forecast year end position, approval of to decrease the 25-26 capital budget for the Munsley Coastal Defence Scheme to £1,139,806, to reflect the apportionment of 250,000 from external contributions to the Chroma scheme, and approval to increase the 25-26 capital budget for the Chroma Coastal Defences Scheme to 1,096,067. Anyway, you know what I mean. 1,096,067 pounds to reflect the apportionment of 250,000 from external contributions from the Munsley scheme, and note the contents of the Q1 Treasury Management Update Report, which we actually have omitted to do. So let's quickly turn to page 91. Got any questions on the Treasury Management Q1 report? For the experts sitting to my right? No? No? Okay, we're content with the Treasury report, okay? Sorry, do they need to be proposed, the recommendations?
Yes, you will need a proposal because it's a formal recommendation to full
Okay, I have a
council. So
proposer.
those
I have a
items.
proposer and a seconder.
Sorry.
Lovely, and all in favour? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, officers. So the next item is the NPOSC review summary. Is that how you would describe it, Councillor Boyle?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I wasn't intending to read it all out. This was the July meeting where the select committee looked at the changes that were going on with the abolition of NHS England over the next 2 years and the 50% cut in the ICBs and the reorganisation of ICBs. And so there were some representatives there trying to explain the early days of what was likely to be happening, but it was so early days, they weren't really sure exactly in which direction it was going. Probably the most important thing that came out of that meeting was, and there's a typo here, which may have been me, the HOS committee agreed to write a letter to the Secretary of State for Health regarding the disbanding of Health Watch, following deep concerns raised by all members of the committee. The invaluable work of Health Watch was recognised by all the committee members. And we know from the years we've watched Health Watch, who've done some really good independent work on behalf of the people of Norfolk, and to lose Health Watch would be awful. So I believe they've got a year's grace at the moment, but they are a great team. I can't recommend them enough. So I think that's short and sweet. If anyone's got any questions.
Has anyone got any questions? Councillor Boyle? I just wondered how big will ICB Norfolk and Suffolk compared to its colleagues like Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire, which seem to be quite massive?
It will be, I think, it's quite possible it will be very massive. Nothing was totally determined, and it could be, like we were hearing earlier, it could be that it will be a Norfolk and Suffolk with a fraction of the staff that they have at the moment. But when the staff came, they were doing exactly what we're doing here, which is, okay, it's going to be reorganised. We've got half the people. We need to do the best we can for everybody. So, but they weren't sure exactly where they were going, but they were going to make as many plans as they were to be able to hand it on in a good way. So that's it really. Very vague, no answers they had, but they were having to carry on with the day to day.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got any questions? No? Does anyone feel that we should have a recommendation here? I was just wondering if we should do similar about the abolition of Health Watch and write and say that we think it's will be very detrimental to the healthcare system of Norfolk? Or do we have a view, for example, that the creation of this joint ICB will be detrimental, given that the standing of the health system in Norfolk is under strain at the moment? I don't know if you feel that either of those letters would be worthwhile writing. Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, so I think there's a real concern about the reduction, the 50% reduction in staff and the effect on staff well-being. I mean, that looks quite horrifying, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, but it's not they were very clear. It's the admin of the ICBs, not the actual what the ICBs do. So what they're producing will be the same, but there will be half the number of people organising it, if that makes sense. So that's where the money's being cut. But obviously they weren't sure how the organisation was going to reshape, reform, or where it was going to be.
Well, there's surely a relevant query there, isn't there, about the shape of the efficiency of its organisation. If it's experiencing a cut that deeply, I don't know.
Yeah, I think until we know what it is, it's quite difficult to actually say anything about that. We certainly could write about Health Watch, but if I was to compose anything for the ICB, I'm not sure exactly what I would put in a letter or a few sentences, because we're not sure exactly where it's going. So you end up with a letter which would be a bit cotton woolly.
Okay, Councillor Bayes, you were going to raise a question.
I was only going to agree that we should send a letter in terms of Health Watch, because I think it's really important that we as a council recognise the impact it will have.
They have done some very good work on our behalf the last few years. So is everyone agree? Are people agreed on that we should write and raising our concerns about the disbanding of Health Watch? And then we'll consider the disbanding, or not, the reformation of ICB at a later state when we have another update from Councillor Boyle. Does that seem reasonable? So how do we leave that? in terms of composing the letter and sending it to the Secretary of State for Health?
Me to, we can, I mean, can work with Councillor Boyle on drafting a letter and send it out on behalf of the committee, and then we'll share a copy with members. We'll also record it as an action on your outcomes and actions list, so we can monitor any responses going forward and keep you updated. We'll also share a copy with the NHOSC if you're happy to do that, Jill. Yeah.
Yep, certainly am. Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. So now we move on to noting the Cabinet Work Programme. Does anyone have any comments on that? Page 107. And then I'm assuming that's a no. Okay, going on to the overview and scrutiny work programme. And is this where we pause to look at the scoping document for the mobile connectivity? Did you guys all get a copy? Am I the only privileged person to get a copy of the scoping document? I think we shared it yesterday, didn't we? Did you want to share it now on the screen?
Chair, would it be helpful if I explained to members who weren't at the session yesterday?
Yes.
What the purpose of this is, and just to cover what's coming to your next meeting. I think Officer Falconbridge is just going to share a sort of suggested scoping document, which we're going to use for some of the bigger pieces of work that the committee will be looking at in the coming months. And you'll see on your work programme for October, under the broad heading of mobile phone connectivity, and that we thought this might be useful to bring this document in at this stage. So that particular item is hopefully to report back on the data collection that the Chief Executive referred to earlier on the mobile phone data connectivity. So that will be your kind of evidence base, hopefully going forward. But once you have that sort of update report, I'm not sure of the format that will come through to you. On the back of that, then the committee have said that they would like to look at perhaps calling in providers if we're able to do that, to investigate and explore a bit further where those issues are and perhaps what can be done to address, particularly where there are what we call not spots in certain areas. So earlier on this year, I suggested that, you know, a scoping document could be useful for these bigger pieces of work for the committee to make sure that you stay focused, and also to help officers and any external people coming in to talk to you on the areas that they should be focusing on. So we make sure that it's quite sort of tightly managed going forward. So that's what this item is for. And I haven't spoken to Stuart Quick, who will be working with Councillor Toy on this, but although, as the Chair mentioned yesterday, it's a bit early in some respects to bring the scoping document forward because you'll need to look at the evidence, but it would be helpful, I think, to have a quick feel now so that I can share that with the officers early on in the stage of how you want to look at this in the longer term. So thank you.
Councillor Hankins, you had some views about this and whether we should look at it from the provider rather than the user.
I welcome the fact that this has been brought to the fore. It wasn't before. Having established the not spots, before we engage the providers, I personally think that there is a need to prioritise when we're talking to the providers, whoever they may be, BT included. And I made the point earlier that I think certainly in rural communities, there are two principal requirements. One is to prioritise mobile connectivity in terms of health, particularly where defibrillators are affected and are unable to connect without some landline. And secondly, there is a business element to this because there are businesses in rural communities that have very poor mobile broadband. So I think in talking to or presenting to providers, we need to be clear on what our priorities are.
Any other members have views on this? Councillor Cushing?
Can someone explain to me how we're going to identify do these areas of not spots actually exist? Because I have seen reports in the EDP which showed particularly grass around Melton Constable, for example, which were not poor. So do we have that, or do we actually, it was the other option to go to all the providers and say what areas are poorly covered by your particular company?
Well, if I may, I think that would be the nature of the scoping document. How do we identify, based on the not spots, the priorities for both those two instances? So there's a piece of work to be done there. I mean, we know where the businesses are, and we can very quickly determine where the house situation is affected.
Councillor Housden?
I think this is tricky because if you go online, you can get maps for all the providers of the coverage areas, and it shows weak spots. But the thing is, if you talk to them, you'll find that EE and Vodafone are joining up to improve their network. And if you look carefully, you'll find that some of the 3G masks have been taken down. So it's difficult to know where to start. There's no point calling them in because I suspect if you had all of them lined up here, you're going to get the same story from each. Then you get into the situation where they're trying to join fibre to copper to nickel or whatever it is, which slows everything down, and they're not replacing all of the cabinets, and they don't have the capacity to increase the supply, because I've been through all of this. So whilst we need to do the work, I simply don't know where you start, because we all know there are black spots all over the place. And the galling thing is, having travelled through several countries in Europe, you have brilliant coverage wherever you go. Here, you get to Dover and you lose your bloody signal immediately. It is quite ridiculous. So I don't know where you start. I mean, you've got to start somewhere. And maybe we have a scoping document that's just to share with the scrutiny here before we let it loose anywhere, to really define really clinically what we want from these providers. And that's the way I see it.
Well, my understanding is we have a preliminary stab at collating the community-based information. This is what Councillor Toy has been doing, so that should reveal some level of not spottage. Yeah. And the question is that sufficient to proceed, given that you want to see it through the lens of health and business, and given that you might want to intersect it with the provider's view about what coverage is. Mind you, that could be somewhat optimistic in my view. So would it just be, I mean, we had thought we could guide the community-based information and structure it somehow that could be more useful for us. But do you think that's just too early and we should just look and see what Councillor Toy is going to present to us? Because that's how it is put down on the work programme. I was just wondering, the idea of using the scoping document is to be a bit more clever about it, whether we want to get the information that we need and perhaps direct the officers towards finding other information that will complement what the councillors have put together.
I think if we had Councillor Toy's research and his paper, that would be a very good starting point. Yeah. Because the problem with all of these providers is an absolute moving feast. I mean, my wife has spent probably 6 hours battling Vodafone on various things. And we're not really any further forward. And to be perfectly honest, you can't get a concrete answer out of them, however much you scream, shout, or write to directors. So I think we need something, perhaps, from Councillor Toy, so we can then work our parameters from Councillor Toy. And I fully support that we should call some of these people in, because they should be answerable, because we do have appalling service in Norfolk. But I do think we've got to have a base to start from.
Okay. Councillor Gray.
I do think that without proper data, we'll be calling people to sit here to answer no questions that we really have. I travel across the district every week, you know, regularly, and there certainly are some spots that are a bit interesting once you get towards Leather Insert. It gets a bit ropey and other places like that. But predominantly, signal outdoors actually isn't that bad in North Norfolk. It's surprising. It can be interesting, but now signal indoors in people's homes. So I wonder, gathering data here, so we're actually asking the right questions about the right areas, because I think you may get someone here, but as Councillor Housden has said, it's difficult sometimes to get them to commit to anything, or they'll commit to everything because they can do everything and they're not very responsible. We need to have really hard questions here, but we need data. Now, there is data out there. I believe the County Council also ran some data gathering. So can we get the access to that as well, so we can make a really informed decision here before we push any of this forward?
My understanding is we have the data now. We have the data on the not spots. So I think rather than get people in and say, there's a problem across North Norfolk, my suggestion is, or my recommendation is, that we prioritise those. And that should be quite a simple thing to do. I mean, we could all, as members, ask our parish councils, where is the problem in your area? How does it interpose with the data we have, so that we can call in the providers and say, in this area, in Stibart, there is no mobile connectivity. What are you prepared to do about that? Simple question.
Councillor Heinrich?
Thank you, Chair. I think we've got to take note of the complexity of this. Whether you're in a not spot or not depends very much on which network you're on.
Yeah.
There is no equality across the networks. In parts of North Walsham, EE works well. In other parts, it won't. But Vodafone will. O2 apparently can offer 5G. None of the others can in North Walsham. You know, that's just one small example, and I imagine it gets much worse when we get into the more rural areas to the west. We need a range of data, not just those that we can get nothing, like Felbrig, but to know which providers are guilty of the biggest not spots, rather than just a broad map of where signals are weak. And we also need a much greater clarity on when 5G is going to be rolled out. You know, we're really running on an antiquated system at the moment. Anyway, it's 2025.
Councillor Shaz?
I'm really mindful that when I look at your October work programme, it's absolutely jammed packed. And you've got some really, really heavy topics in there which have come up time and time again. I note that I have got a line in there about considering how you want to feed into the budget process. Would it be appropriate for the committee if Dan and myself sent you some information about what we're doing in the form of a written report, rather than take up that time during the meeting? So I'm looking, you've got the workforce on there, you've got the homelessness strategy, you've got the HAS update and the mobile phone connectivity. It's a really, really meaty agenda. So if I, with Dan, sent you some information about what we are doing, and then keep that information flow going, and if at any point anybody wants to meet with Dan and I to discuss it and feed back to the committee, I'm just really aware that the month after I take up the whole committee with 8 reports.
What do members think about that? Would you be happy with the written report?
I think if I can just add to that as well, I think that would be a good suggestion. I have put on there that is quite early, that I've listed that, and that would be helpful. But also just to update you that the workforce strategy will come through to November now, so that's not on there. I think from the feedback that you've just given, and perhaps to make it a bit clearer for next month, that the initial report will be the feedback on the data collation that the council has done on mobile phone connectivity, and then following on from that, and I will feed some of this to Stuart that you want to look at, that you want him to focus on, and then following on from that, we will do this scoping exercise again separately, perhaps as a committee in a pre-agenda session, to decide how you want to hone in on those specific aspects. So we'll readjust the work programme to reflect those changes.
Is everyone happy with that? Yeah, Councillor Fredericks.
Chair, is there any chance that, sorry,
Councillor Fredericks was waiting quietly.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's the art of the possible here. It's obviously a real issue across the district, and it is the art of the possible of what we can achieve as a council. So I think maybe even suggesting it to the town and parish councils as a course that they could take up as well. They might have a viewpoint which is different to us. But I'm just saying it is the art of the possible here. It would be lovely to get Vodafone sitting in a chair, but we're never going to do that, are we? Well, they wouldn't answer the phones anyway.
oh,
But
that's right.
let's face it. So I think the best thing that we can do is, you know, present those figures in a way. Unfortunately, we can help advocate, but we can't influence those private companies.
Chair, could Councillor Toy sweep up what Norfolk County Council have done in their data? Would he have time to sweep that up and bring it forward to us?
I think it's worth an email to ask him.
Okay.
If that's okay with
So
you
I've just
guys.
checked online. They've got stuff. They've got data that I've just picked up on my phone. So if he could sweep that up, that would be really helpful.
So that's an email to Councillor Toy. I can't answer that on his
Okay,
behalf.
all right. Okay.
Could Emma, could that be part of the conversation you have with Officer Quick? That he brings in that information as well? Yeah, okay. Any more comments on the work programme, other than there's lots of it and we're very much looking forward to contributing? Anything else that anybody, Councillor Bayes?
Only that I think the scoping document is really good. I think it gives focus, and I think it's what's required. I think if not, we go off in different tracks, lines, etc. So I think the document is very good to actually keep us focused and identify exactly what we want out of it.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Right, if you could feed that back, Emma, that we're very happy with it. Lovely, does that leave us with, we have no need to exclude the press and public, so that endeth the meeting. Thank you very much indeed.